Let's talk more then about this truce that's due to kick in tomorrow morning between Israel and Hamas. We're joined tonight by independent security and defense analyst Helmoed Heitman. Helmoed, a very good evening to you. Good to talk to you. So how fragile a truce is this, given that Benjamin Netanyahu, the Prime Minister of Israel, has made it clear that at the end of this 4 days, fighting will continue, and even today, in the hours prior to its beginning tomorrow, we're still seeing rather fierce strikes on Gaza?
I think it probably is quite fragile, although I don't think the Israelis would be dumb enough to do anything themselves. But it's not just Hamas on the other side. There are other groups as well. One of them might want to be a spoiler and disrupt it. But I think between Israel and Hamas, I mean, they really don't like each other, but I don't think they'll spoil this one. It's important PR for both of them. And it's obviously good news for the people being released on both sides and their families. And the good news is that the two parties are actually speaking to each other through mediators. You know, one of the things people tend to forget in any war, any conflict, unless you literally exterminate the other side altogether, you have to live with each other in the future, which should actually govern the conduct of things. This one was particularly nasty on both sides. That makes it difficult, and that gives the fragility. But I think the real issue will be the problems immediately after when the fighting restarts. The question is, can that be headed off? Can there be further discussions?
And when you talk about the issues posed, we know one of the agreements is that the Israelis, from what we're hearing, will not, for example, have drones over Gaza during certain periods for a few hours, because Hamas's concern is that they may be used for some level of intelligence gathering. Now, with these hostages and captives that are going to be exchanged by the Israelis and Hamas, could they, based on what they've seen and experienced, play a key role in intelligence gathering of some sort for either side?
Look, I suppose not so much the prisoners the Israelis have held. I mean, they've been in prison. The hostages, well, unless they've been kept blindfolded, they will have seen some things. They will have heard some stuff. They will have some information they can deliver. Little children probably not, but any older kids or adults can. That's a fact. I think even if the Israelis don't have drones overhead, I would be very surprised if they don't have some at a distance. And there are some quite impressive long-range optronic systems in aircraft and larger drones that can monitor things. So I don't think it'll be entirely free of monitoring from the Israeli side. But I can see why the Hamas people would not want drones overhead, because one thing it would show where these hostages are coming from. Mm-hmm. They're obviously coming out of somewhere where they've been held. But I think the intelligence gathering side of it will not be big in this case. There'll be some, but not a heck of a lot.
And just looking at the numbers from what has been reported so far, about 50 Israeli women and children, will be released under this agreement. About 150 were told Palestinians, also women and children who are currently in Israeli prisons, will be part of this swap, if we can call it that. What do those numbers suggest as far as the dynamic in terms of power and leverage?
Look, I think the key issue here, that particularly from the Hamas point of view, this is a PR exercise. They've got some fairly bad press about killing civilians and taking hostages. They're now trying to undo some of that damage by releasing at least the women and children. From the Israeli point of view, releasing them, they're probably going to release mainly low-profile people. I don't think there's too much to be read into it in terms of the relative power of the two sides. Where Hamas, of course, has some leverage over Israel is that they still hold hostages, and those hostages are at risk as long as the fighting continues. So they do have that leverage. That's there. That must be in the back of the mind of every Israeli officer who's involved in this.
Well, I suppose what I'm asking is, for example, Israel, yes, these are not, as they've already said, they're not going to be releasing people convicted of murder. It'll be women and children in Israeli jails. But releasing 150 in exchange for 50, does that speak to the level of desperation or commitment even to getting as many hostages back from within Gaza?
Look, perhaps, but it's fairly common. You had it when South Africa and Cuba and Angola exchanged prisoners. You've had in other cases where the country that is holding a larger number of prisoners tends to also release a larger number. It's maybe not quite pro rata, but from the Israeli point of view, they probably have quite a lot of very low-profile prisoners who are not really a problem for them. and they can get rid of them. They don't have to look after them. They don't have to feed them. They don't have to house them. It's less of an admin problem. So let a larger number go. I wouldn't read a level of desperation into that. I think it's fairly common or guard that the side that holds the greater number of prisoners, more or less pro rata, leases a greater number as well when the exchange happens.
I want to get your thoughts on two aspects, because Hamas had said from when the Israeli bombardment of Gaza began that some of the hostages, at least those in its custody, had been killed. Apparently tens of them would have been killed in the Israeli bombardment of Gaza. But they also said right at the beginning that some of the people who were taken on October 7th were being held by other formations within Gaza. How much of a complication to the whole process are those two aspects?
Look, the ones who get killed, well, they're not a complication anymore. It happens. If they produce the bodies and it's obvious from the injuries that they were killed by shelling or the effective bombing or whatever, then fine, that's it. It's been done. Nothing to do about it. If the bodies were to show signs of torture or, say, bullet wounds, that would be a different ballgame. Then the Israelis might get hot under the collar again. And that's assuming, of course, that they're going to release the bodies of those that were killed. The other aspect, yeah, that can get a little tricky as well. And it remains to be seen how the two sides handle it. It gets, that sort of exchange when others are still being held is complicated. Normally in this sort of exchange, you get rid of everybody you've got, not hold back quite a few of them. So that could lead to issues in the future. I think probably the hope on the Hamas side is that by hanging on to them, they will limit Israeli options in Gaza. Because the Israelis obviously want to kill their own people if they can avoid it. And that in turn suggests that maybe there is going to be an opening in the not too distant future, the two sides to actually talk to each other. I mean, not immediately, but they've got to talk to each other at some point. And the sooner the better. The sooner they talk, the fewer people die.
And in terms of what you spoke about earlier, what happens after this 4 days, because the Qataris who mediated this process do caveat their statement by saying that, yes, it's a 4-day pause in the fighting, subject to negotiation and perhaps even an extension. We don't know if this process will go well enough for that to happen. But we've just spoken, for example, about the presence of other armed groups within the Palestinian territories, including in Gaza. But also Netanyahu has made it clear that he will not rest until he's annihilated Hamas. And some have said, well, that objectively is not a necessarily realistic goal, and we're now 6 weeks into this. Is it still possible to fully rid Gaza of Hamas and perhaps any other form of resistance movement?
No, I don't think so. But two aspects. One, the fact that there are other groups does complicate life a lot for everybody. To some extent, it's a sort of modesty veil for Hamas. They can hide some things behind that. So that wasn't us, it was actually this other group, or that other group, or that guy on his own, lone wolf guy. So there may be a certain amount of nonsense about that, but there are other groups active in there, and that will complicate things throughout, not just now with the matter of the hostages, but more generally. For instance, if Hamas and the Israelis decide to start talking to each other, one of the others might be a spoiler and launch a few attacks just to get the Israelis all steamed up again. That's certainly a possibility. On the Israeli side, I'm afraid, maybe I'm a bias on this one, but I don't see much likelihood of serious negotiation while Mr. Netanyahu is running the show. He's got his mindset on this. I mean, I don't think he's ever forgiven anybody who's not Israeli for the death of his brother during the Entebbe raid. And he just hasn't gotten over that. And, he's a soldier, supposed to get over that sort of thing. I think it's rather unfortunate that they have him running Israel at the moment, not somebody like Rabin, who is a much more rational human being and realized you have to live with each other in the long term. And the sooner you realize that, accept it, and get down to working out a modus vivendi, the better.
Are you suggesting that...
I'm sorry, just to come back to it, eradicating Hamas. Look, you can get, maybe they can get all the guys they've identified, but they won't have identified all members of Hamas. And of course, if your father is a member of Hamas and you believe in his cause, which you would if you were his young son, and your father gets killed, you probably join Hamas yourself. That's the problem with any insurgency type situation or guerrilla type situation, that you can kill a guy, yeah, but that means maybe one or two others join because they're now bitter and twisted about him being killed. The other issue is that very often the people you do manage to catch and kill or capture are not necessarily the brightest and the best, because they manage to evade it. And the most important ones will be extricated by one way or another, so not to be there to be caught. So eradicating Hamas, I don't see as a possibility at all. I think it maybe can reduce Hamas's ability to launch attacks into Israel, yes, that they can do. They can then they would have to get very clever very quickly in how they handle relations with the people in Gaza to prevent it all starting again and to cool down the situation.
Are you
That's
in
difficult,
agreement?
but I certainly don't see a magic solution.
Right. Are you in agreement then, Helmoed, with a school of thought that says for there to be peace in the region between the Israelis and the Palestinians, three things need to happen. There needs to be a return, basically, and maybe this will come at the latter stage, a return to a process that would see proper Palestinian statehood established, the end of the occupation by the Israelis, but also what some analysts have said most importantly, a scenario where there's no Hamas in Gaza, but also there's no Netanyahu in Israel.
I think that probably sums it up pretty well. One of the things that stirs it, albeit now indirectly in Gaza, is the illegal settlements on the West Bank. They don't help the situation. They build tension there now. The Palestinian Authority in the West Bank has managed to sit on it and keep it calm, but it does stir feelings generally, and in Hamas it happens now. Hamas really get going. So yeah, I think you ideally want Hamas out of the way. Now, whether the sponsor, Iran, will allow that to happen is another question. And on the Israeli side, the current government, I'm not sure, is capable of coming to a long-term peaceful settlement with Hamas or anybody else.
Helmoed-Römer Heitman, good to speak to you. Helmoed is an independent security and defense analyst.